Get recording. Well, hi everyone. This is Patricia Worby, Alchemy Therapies. Today I'm doing something really different, something that I haven't done before. I'm actually going to set up these conversations, and today with me, my very good friend and colleague, Jane Lumley. Hi, Jane.
Hello,
good that you could be here. And we're going to be discussing, we've kind of decided we're going to discuss neuroplasticity today, folks. Yes, so that's a bit of a mouthful, but what it actually means is the ability of the brain and the nervous system to adapt to its environment. So that's what we're talking about, and it's a really big, it's not so much a hot topic now in the way that it was, say, 10 years ago when it was first discovered, but it's certainly being evaluated and disseminated a lot more, I think, and people are becoming more aware of it. Would you agree with that, Jane?
Absolutely. I think it's actually something that people have heard it. They don't necessarily know what it is, but people are ready to learn about this now, and more of us as well, more in the sort of therapeutic circles and teaching circles are actually understanding more about the potential of all of this, which is very exciting.
Yeah. How does it affect the work you do?
Hugely now, to be quite honest. I've always helped clients to realise that what they feel is now isn't fixed and that they can change, and they're always very delighted when they realise that they can, sometimes with really quite small shifts as well, which I've always found very interesting, that people think there's something very big and they'll say things like, oh, I can't even open that up, or I'll never stop crying, and in fact when you show them that one thought they might have or one habit that they're using, that isn't serving them, and when they let that go or they shift that thought, that everything starts to really change, and they realise it isn't such a big thing often. In fact, I think it's the tiny hidden things that are what's getting in the way so much of the time. And that fits in so much with all of this, that the idea of being able to say to someone with all truth that, what you have going on right now is not you, and you can change this and you can choose. I think it's about choice. It's knowing that you can choose how you're going to feel, and that you're going to grow older feeling good if you want to feel good.
Yeah, well, now you've brought up the idea of aging gracefully or gratefully, as I think Marilyn Schlitz calls it,
yes,
which I quite like. But the whole concept that your life course isn't determined by what you were given, say, when you were born, and that a lot of what we are, our behaviours, our thoughts, our feelings even, are patterns of behaviour, patterns of thought that we have learnt and become quite fixed, don't they? They become habitual.
Yeah.
And what I like to think when I'm working with people, and it sounds like we do very similar things, I know that your tools and techniques might be slightly different, but you're working with people, aren't you, to change their responses to the world and therefore increase their sense of freedom and choice, exactly what you just said. So, and that's basically what I do as well. And isn't it interesting that we find it so difficult to do that for ourselves?
That's been one of the most interesting things for me, as you know well, to actually learn that we can't do this. I think years ago I came across this idea that we can't fix a thought by a thought, and it's so absolutely true. We need to go, almost like having to go in by the back door, and I think that's what I've discovered for myself after years of working with other people, thousands of client hours and helping lots of people to get well, and realising that I needed help all through that time. Of course, I didn't get it a lot of the time. People used to say, who's helping you? And, I looked as if I was absolutely fine, because of course, when you're teaching and you're leading workshops, of course, you are absolutely fine. But really important to accept and embrace the idea of asking for help outside yourself. And then the changes are actually uncomfortable, but also really exciting and inspiring. I'm getting more and more into actually finding all these things in myself. Fantastic. And letting them go. It's very exciting.
Yeah. I think that just shows us that the brain is adapting all the time, and therefore growing new neurons is something we do routinely from the time we're born to the time we die. I mean, that's what's fundamentally different about this understanding.
Yes.
That it's not when I did my training, and I'm sure you were the same, we were told that by the age of 19, 20, you had all the brain cells you were ever going to get, and that was it. And then it was just a slow degradation until death.
Downhill.
And many of us absorbed that idea as if it was the truth, and we lived our lives accordingly. Where I would just try and cram in as much as possible into my sort of early 20s, when I was just trying to find my way in the world, because I thought it's use it or lose it. It's use it or lose it. If I don't get it out there and do the stuff I need to do, and of course that's a huge stress on the system, and it's not actually productive in the way you hope. It's actually stressful.
It is. Yeah.
I've learned to lean back a little bit now, at the age I am now, and do less but get more out of what I do, and that's really by changing the way I think and learning when to ask for help. And I think that's so key, because even as knowledgeable as I believe myself to be now, because I've trained a lot in psychology, just when I'm triggered, my brain is firing in a certain old way that says danger, shut down, or hit out, or do something scripted. It's very difficult for us with our brains that are working in the way they've always worked to take a step back and say, okay, I have a choice here.
It is. And I think that's just, I remember when I first came across this idea, and I mean, I've been a psychology teacher, lecturer, psychotherapist, done hypnotherapy too, loads of coaching training and so on. And what came to me as a real sort of aha moment was that thought and that understanding that we have that about 90 to 95% of what's going on in our brain is going on subconsciously. So that our reactions happening before the conscious mind even knows what's going on. And that is actually a revelation for many, many people, because we were all told, weren't we, that your conscious mind is the important bit. We've got to keep using this conscious mind and making our decisions and be more effective and aware and everything. And in fact, it's actually quite a release when we realize that a huge amount of this, virtually everything, is going on in the unconscious. And then that opens up this whole new, relatively new, it isn't, it's old, isn't it? But that for a lot of people, it is new to them, this idea of, well, actually, I'm being driven by stuff I can't see, by stuff I can't hear. I don't know what actually is making me do what I do. And instead of feeling out of control and lost with that, then people like us can help our clients and our friends and families and ourselves to realize, well, actually, that doesn't mean I'm out of control or there's nothing I can do. It means I can change. I can look inside, deliberately look for those patterns and decide I'll have a different pattern. And when you see that change happen in ourselves and in other people, I mean, it's just so inspiring to see that.
Yeah, I think it was one of the main awakenings for me was doing hypnotherapy training, because I must admit, I'll be really honest here, I went to do hypnotherapy training to debunk it, because I come from a very scientific frame. Okay, my training was in biochemistry, pharmacology, a pure science training. And as far as I was concerned, hypnotherapy sounded woo-woo, nonsense, out there stuff. And I kind of was intrigued, and I wanted to see what weird brain manipulation they did with people, and how they did it. But the training I received was so revelatory, because I realized, oh my God, most of what we are is unconscious. And so I think that's why willpower, for instance, is such a difficult one to say. I must change, I will do it differently from now on, because that's a conscious thought, and that's only 5 to 10%, and the rest is unconscious. So I think what you're raising there is the idea that if the problem is at the level of the unconscious, then so must the solution be, in my view.
Yes,
and these neuroplastic changes that we're talking about, the rewiring essentially, can be engendered by imagination, by taking someone into a state where they imagine a different reaction or a different scenario, they put themselves in an empowering frame of mind, which lights up different neural pathways in the brain. It starts to actually increase firing in new novel pathways that don't normally fire, because normally we run our default network. It's actually called that. So isn't it wonderful to know that you can actually do this by using the power of your imagination, which we do all the time actually, but we tend to do it negatively, as you can imagine.
We do, don't we? I mean, I've often said to people, for example, a lady many years ago who her son was abroad, in a fairly dangerous job, and she would talk about when he came home and sat on the settee, she would be thinking about all, when was he going away again, and what was it going to mean, and what could happen to him. And it was really important to help her to realize that, when we used to talk, I've talked with so many clients about, if someone's late, what does our brain do? It goes straight to, oh my gosh, they could have had an accident on the motorway, not, oh, they might have bumped into the girl of their dreams.
Yeah.
And it's our default, isn't it, about the dangerous nature of life? And I think that's so important as well, where our default is. But the fact that we can actually change that. We actually can do that.
Yeah, you've actually reminded me about the idea that the negativity bias,
Yes.
If you analyze I don't know how many thousand thoughts we think a day. I think it's several thousand thoughts we think, and about 80% of them are negative. With some people, I imagine it's even more. When I look back at my life, actually, I would have said I'm a positive person. You asked me, I'd have said, oh no, I'm a very positive person. But at the back, in the back brain, the unconscious part, I would often be running scenarios that said, what if I fall off my bike? What if I have a car accident? What if so-and-so doesn't come home and then they're dying at this moment? I would always be running really terrifically negative scenarios, which unfortunately it's a human trait, if you like, but I think it can be changed. And I'd like to think over the time that I've been working that I have changed that. I have changed it. And I notice it much more in myself when I'm doing it now. But then,
I think that's one of the inspiring things about studying and doing this sort of work. When we do it with other people, we're learning so much all the time about ourselves. And I used to say to clients, and I still do very honestly, that every single session with a client is me learning loads of stuff about me and my life. It isn't just about them. It's actually a two-way thing. And that kind of understanding that I think you mentioned willpower, and it's so important because I think we were trained when we were young to use willpower to be better at things. And I think I used that a lot. And I used to say to people, I've got very strong willpower. And I know that it sometimes goes against me because I can make myself run that extra quarter of a mile before I get home instead of coming straight home. And I was wearing myself out. And that was a very obvious one, but seeing that at other levels in myself as well. And so I think willpower is wonderfully powerful for us, but it's also can be quite a destructive force for us too, because we're trying, that very idea, isn't it, of trying to do something or working hard or struggling. And one of my underlying beliefs that I worked on was that thing about life's a struggle, everything's hard. And if you've got that running in the background, whilst you're saying to people, I've always been seen as a very positive person, and I would say my life's been really happy and exciting and adventurous, and I'm really positive about things. But like you, I'm very aware, more so even now, of the little tiny glimmers. And again, for me, it's always tiny. It's like little tiny half thoughts that I don't even let formulate, but the knowing that we're trying to formulate is telling me that those beliefs are still there, and that we need to keep working on them and finding them.
Yeah, and I think my belief was similar. Life is tough, you have to work hard to succeed. It came from a feeling of never being enough, and that was nobody's fault particularly. I didn't grow up in an abusive household, fairly average family, but somehow the message got communicated to me, and I think that's to do with a large part of my adverse childhood experience of my mum being quite an anxious person, and having lost a baby before me. So I was brought up to feel like, look out, keep an eye out, something bad might be happening, So
Yeah.
I had that kind of hyper arousal, stress awareness, always vigilant, thinking what might be around might be dangerous. So first of all, obviously, you've got to become aware that you're doing that. And I think that's a big part of what we do, isn't it? Teach people that this is happening, and that it actually is a physical response. It's not just a brain response. It changes the way our body responds to life. But that the origin really, it's the brain, but it's also the heart. I mean, I'm not going to get into heart coherence today. That's another discussion. But, the way we think changes our body physiologically. So taking control of that in some way, and I don't mean through willpower, I mean through being the flow of life, and kind of really using this power of your subconscious to change the way you respond to your environment, so that you can actually be more positive, more powerful, and more connected with other people and with your life experience. I just think this is the understanding that I've now come to, and it's transformed everything about my life, really. And just to give the people listening to this an idea of where I am now, obviously I'm a therapist. Well, that was never in my game plan, ever. I was going to save the world through science, and I was going to discover the cure for cancer or something like that. I had, only a small goal, and it didn't really work out, because science is a very tough game. It was very misogynist when I graduated, and I ended up doing I was overqualified for most of the stuff I did. I got disheartened and ended up getting rather ill. That was my wake-up call. You could say it was my neuroplastic moment, if you like, because my brain was following this trajectory that I had created, that I've got to work super hard to achieve, to get whatever it was, the goal I envisaged would be. I don't know. I didn't know what I wanted, but I just wanted to feel better. And then it just threw me a curveball and said, no, you're going to be ill. And here it is, because you've been running this high stress response for so long, and it couldn't support me anymore. So that's when I crashed with a chronic fatigue illness when in my mid-30s. So yeah, that was the point at which, first of all, I thought my life is over. I'll be honest, it wasn't like, oh, this is such an opportunity to rejig my life. No, it was, my life is over, and it's so unfair. That was what I ran. It's so unfair, because I've worked so hard. How come this has hit me now? In the top prime of my life. Of course, it's no accident. I think because when you're running a program that is stressful, that the whole system has to collapse in order to stop you from pursuing what is ultimately not healthy.
Yeah.
Those sorts of driven, goal-oriented lives, which we see all around us. I mean, I see all the people at the gym, pounding away indoors on an electrical machine, that's supposed to be exercise. And I think this is mad, just go for a walk, just go out if you can. I know it's not easy in some places, but to find somewhere where you can be outdoors and access light and be connected with nature, for me is a much more healthful way of living. And I know I'm getting off the subject of neuroplasticity, but it's so interesting that I think our lives bring us not what we want, but what we ultimately need. Because it was really where I ended up now. Becoming a therapist was because I needed help at that point. After 2 years, I had to ask for help, much to my own disgust. And that was the beginning of my journey. I don't know about you, but it was a transformative thing.
I think it's very interesting, and I've come across it again and again with therapists, that we actually understand other people terribly well often, because we've become therapists because we were looking for ourselves. And I've been a teacher, a social worker, teacher of antenatal classes as well, studied health all the way through my life. And I used to joke with clients and say, they used to say, oh, you know, and then you would know I wasn't well with something else. And I'd say, yeah, I seem to end up having to be ill to then be able to help everybody. And my clients would appear, you know, without knowing I'd have these things wrong with me. I don't know how it works. It's fantastic. I love it. The fact that I would be struggling with ME type symptoms, and then started getting clients from all around the country who travelled from goodness knows where. One lady who came from the north of Scotland when I was up in Northumberland said to me, you just really understand that's why we come. And I thought, yeah, I do, because I knew what it was like to not be able to brush my teeth, that my arm would be so tired and physically painful that I couldn't hold the toothbrush for that length of time to brush my teeth. So, and getting upstairs at that point meant actually sort of going part way up and sitting down, and then going up on my knees a little bit and so on at my worst times. And then I would learn something new, and I would learn a new therapy or a new aspect of a therapy, and I'd find I could get better. And I would then tackle these ideas and what was going on inside me and do all the right things, and then go off for a bike ride with a friend, no problem, go off for another bike ride, and then the third time, crash again. And then next day, suddenly think, what's wrong with me? And 2 days later, be white as a sheet and back in bed a lot of the time. And thinking, and like you, this is just so unfair. I'm such a bright, happy, healthy person, you know? And it is hard to take all of that, because we're still looking for, well, what's going on? I used to think something's at the root of this. There's something underneath that I haven't got yet. And it was only really a year or so ago that I actually got to what the root was, and the root was me. And I think,
as it always is,
then that's a wonderful thing and a hard thing at the same time, because some people aren't ready. I was obviously ready then. It took me a long time to get to that, even though I've been looking at internal stuff all those years. I would then still come out of that again and think, well, you know, when I finally discovered, for example, that I was severely magnesium deficient, it was as if, oh my gosh, there we go, that was it, biochemical. And it did help for a long time, you know, large doses of magnesium. And then I realized that I was getting some of the symptoms again, and I wasn't feeling so well. And I think that's what you talked then about it all. I think it's about balance, isn't it? It's about balancing all the different aspects of our lives, so that the person who's bashing away in the gym every day doing weights, for example, who just wants to be big and strong, they're not what I would call, and many of us would call, a healthy person. And in fact, they find out for themselves they're not healthy. They might be fit in a particular way, but not the same as health.
No, that's right.
So much work on the brain, which fascinates me. I was reading this chap, I've forgotten his name now, somebody, Cleo. I'll come across his name in a second, but he actually looks at all the different aspects of, you know, the new research really on exercise, and suggesting that we really need to have exercise that's not just cardiovascular and resistance, you know, but also adding in the cognitive exercise. And how interesting is that? And that people, some of the gaming people who are devising games are now bringing out or working on games for the cognitive self whilst we exercise. So that someone who's doing, you know, you're playing tennis, you're not just hitting a ball, you're having to work out what your opponent's doing, and where the lines of the court are, and what the light's like, and you know, all of those different aspects. We're using the brain in so many ways. So somebody going and just walking on a treadmill, you know, they're going to the gym 3 times a week. Like you say, my logic would be, well, go outside if you can, go and walk in the fresh air, because you're getting so much more benefit and stimulation than you will on a treadmill.
Yeah, but you're raising a really important point, actually, and thank you for pinpointing that, because I listened to it's Ryan Glatt, I think his name is, but he's an exercise physiologist, and but it made me think, actually, how much of new skill learning, you know, whether it's sport or music, for instance, which playing an instrument has a similar effect on the brain as learning a new skill, any new skill, but it's so, the brain lights up in such a coordinated way when you learn a new instrument, because you're using motor skills, you're using planning, predictive skills, your auditory circuits are running. Everything is working in a way that really lights up integrative neural pathways in your brain. And so it's one of the best things you can do to learn a new skill, whatever that is. And I think what we have to do with exercise, for instance, is to make sure that we're not doing the same thing over and over and over, because the cardiovascular system is benefiting from that to some degree, but we're missing a whole big piece of that picture, which is the brain, which is a marvelous organ. I mean, it's an astonishing piece of kit, really, that molds at minute to minute towards whatever's happening in our environment, and we only use a tiny fraction of that when we're doing repetitive, whether it be bad habits, or toxic thoughts, or doing the same gym exercise over and over. We're limiting ourselves unnecessarily. So I think I kind of want to bring it to a bit of a close just for today. I'm sure you've raised so many interesting points that I'd like to follow up on. I already made a mental note of a few. So we'll definitely do another recording. I'd like to talk a little bit more about chronic fatigue. I think that'd be really interesting as a wake-up call, because it kind of is a really big thing when people get an illness that's out of the blue, even though it isn't really when you look at the predispositions. And maybe we can also bring in a little bit about epigenetic tendencies and so on, but that's another day. Thank you so much for being my guest today, and I know I could talk to you for hours, and I know we've only covered a tiny amount really, but it's an ongoing practice. So thank you so much, Jane, and speak to you soon. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Bye for now.